fintechs meeting regulatory requirements. One question that remains in my mind is, to what extent are the regulatory requirements and regimes doable? And how much of them can remain the way they are, and how much really just need to change. I won't ask you that because, let me do this. If you want to answer that question, you can, but I'll move on to something else as well, so you have a choice. Um, so, Chris, I kind of wanted to start with you on this question because you've got a unique perspective on this. But talking a little bit about impacts, and I know we've touched on it a little bit already. But access to digital finance, financial services is a core element of the Bill and Melinda Gates Financial Services for the Poor program. What is your assessment of the impact that fintech has had so far on the unbanked and underserved? And as these technologies continue to expand, what are the opportunities and challenges ahead?
Absolutely. So I'm going to use a broader definition of fintech than maybe we're using today to include telco providers, because they've been really the innovators in the spaces in which we work. If you look at the surveys on the number of people or the portion of the population that has access to financial services the World Bank does on a triennial basis, in 2011, about half of the entire world had access to some kind of formal financial services account. And as of 2018, is about 2/3 now, about 68%. If you look at lower income countries, though, the numbers are dramatically lower. In 2011, it was 13% of people had access to a formal financial services account. By 2018, it improved, but only to about 35%. So a big improvement. Still, there's a lot of more room to go, especially for women. About 1 billion of the 1.7 people who don't have access to financial services accounts are women. Most of them are in Africa. And so there are big things that we need to do there to address the gender gap, which has been persistent throughout all the studies that the World Bank has done, and we're not quite sure why that is. So at the foundation, we're spending a lot of time thinking about what cultural and perhaps also regulatory issues may exist there. I think in general, though, the countries that have had the most success in terms of expanding access to financial services have adopted a multi-part approach. And so one is policy innovation, and that's rethinking the regulations. That's everything from licensing firms, what kinds of firms are allowed to provide services. How is KYC done for consumers who may have no ability to prove who they are? So there's something called tiered KYC in some countries. It's a little bit about how people get their cash into the system, since there are no branches in most villages. And so you would go to a third party that might take cash on your behalf and then enter it through their own personal mobile phone into the financial system for you. And so these are some of the policy innovations. But I think the most important technologies that have driven the increase in access have been, first of all, around identity, again. And so perhaps the most famous example is India, which has adopted the Aadhaar system several years ago. They now have 1.3 billion people registered through this, and they have their fingerprints or retinal scans registered. And I've seen the tremendous impact this has in terms of just being able to get access to financial services. Myself, I stood in a branch and watched someone just walk up to the counter, put their thumb on a thumbprint reader. They were authenticated almost instantly, and 2 minutes later, they had an account. And that's how easy it was for them to open the account. So identity is a huge technology in this space, very important. And the Gates Foundation funds some World Bank research currently looking at design principles for national identity systems. And we've also developed an open source platform that's available to anyone to use if they would like to adopt a modern digital identity system. I think the second technology, which I've already alluded to, which has been critical, has been the use of the mobile phone. I won't spend too much time talking about it, other than the fact that ownership levels are incredibly high, even in very poor countries. And this is probably the way that we will get to most of the rest of the people who are unbanked today. The third technology that I mentioned that's been really important, and is probably the geekiest technology I'll mention right now, is interoperable payment systems. So I know it'll come as a shock to people in the United States that some non-banks are not allowed to access their national payment systems. That was a joke. Okay, right. Okay, so sorry. Room full of central bankers. Sorry. So I know in the United States we don't allow that either. But in many countries, that is a challenge. If you're a new provider, whether you're a telco, whether you're a fintech, whether you're a social media platform, getting access to that national payment system makes your product valuable. Otherwise, the only people that your customers can transact with are other customers. And so the Gates Foundation for some years has urged countries to consider the development of interoperable payment systems. And because we got a lot of pushback years ago when we were advocating for this, commercial banks would say, well, this is our platform. Why should we let these non-banks in? Or new providers would say, why should I build a platform that my competitors can use? So we sponsored research to develop a reference architecture for an interoperable payment system, which is now available on GitHub today. It's called Mojaloop, after the Swahili word moja for one or together. and you can download it today, and it can form the basis of a new national payment system. It's being deployed commercially by 2 mobile network operators in Africa in 22 countries, jointly to connect 110 million accounts across 22 countries. And one central bank in East Africa is adopting as well as part of its national payments grid, and other central banks are evaluating as well. So interoperable payment systems are a big part of the technology that has the biggest impact, I think, in terms of access to inclusion. But remember, all these things have to be paired with an enabling regulatory environment. And so lead the foundation's work on regulatory reform and having conversations with academics, with lawyers, with regulators and industry people about how we can ensure that these systems evolve in a safe and sound manner, in a manner that protects consumers, but still allows for innovation.